It's me again. Do you guys have any energy left at the third day? It's been a long ride for everyone, I guess. So we have here, as I said, Brandon and Nico. Brandon is co-founder and CTO of Embark, an autonomous trucking company. Well, a company that retrofits and fits trucks for autonomous driving. And Nico, the co-founder of Sender and head of strategy. And it's a company, it's a marketplace that connects shippers and carriers, right? So people with
on
trucks.
Road freight, correct.
Sorry?
On road freight, on trucking.
Okay, yes. So. All right, do you want to briefly introduce your companies in a little more detail than I just gave?
Go ahead?
Sure.
Brandon, go ahead.
Of course. So we're Embark Trucks, and we're focused on automating the long haul in trucking, and there's two key reasons why we think this is super important.
I'm going to interrupt you just 1 second. Brandon works in a US company,
That's correct.
and Nico works in a European-based company, so we'll talk about these things, the differences.
Yeah, and so Embark focused on automating trucking. We got into this industry purely myself through the passion of robotics, and had the intuition very early on that self-driving vehicles is a really hard problem to solve. And trucking sits at the intersection of a great economic opportunity, but also a simplified technology problem, right? You think about driving in the city streets, it's pretty chaotic. You've got pedestrians everywhere. But in automated trucking, we're talking about the long haul, right? Going between major cities within the United States. And those are pretty empty roads. And I think what's exciting about the opportunity in trucking as well is two things. One is the labor shortage that exists in the United States. And the fact that the average age of a truck driver is north of 55 years old, so it's a very aging population. And then the second piece is safety. Over the last couple of years, the number of deaths on US highways has actually started to increase, and that's because of distracted driving. And autonomy, I think, is the only solution to this, right? We have 50,000 people dying on US highways every single year, and I think that's a pretty important mission to tackle.
Thank you. Nico?
So Nicholas, co-founder at Sender. Sender is the leading digital freight forwarder here in Europe. So what we do is we connect large-scale shippers, the big multinational companies, with small and medium trucking companies that are on average between 5 and 50 trucks. That's more or less our sweet spot, and therefore working on digitizing, automating, and optimizing based on data the whole road freight market here in Europe. Sender started out 7 years ago. We are 1,000 employees across 11 offices today, and working with the majority of the big multinational firms here in Europe.
All right. I think it was pretty interesting to mention how in US you do, when you say long haul and autonomy, you just help enable the drivers to, let's say, not relax or take the eyes off the road only on the highway, right? But so you're not substituting the driver, but you're enabling them to be more.
Yeah, to actually get into our solution a little bit more specifically, our vision is to actually remove the driver from the truck. And the way we envision this operation...
is not removing the driver.
No, it is to remove them from the truck.
Okay.
Fully autonomous, yeah.
Right.
But the way we actually get this to work is we have humans do the first and last mile of the trip. So the intercity driving, where there is more complexity, they will take the freight from, say, the distribution center to what we call essentially our yards, the transfer points, and they will drop off the trailer. From there, our solution will hook up the trailer and take it all the way across the country to its final destination. And so in this world, we actually still have this mixed modality of humans driving trucks, where humans are great at doing what they do, signing the bill of lading, doing the pre-trip inspection checks, interacting with the endpoint and the customer. And the autonomy does what the autonomy is best at, right? The monotonous task of driving down the highway for 10 hours at a time with nothing really changing.
Right. All right.
And maybe if I can give an example why this is also important is here out of Europe. If you think about Europe, I think most of you have seen somewhere in the news that truck drivers are in shortage. And in the UK, beginning of the year, we had that there was no gas and some fuel stations, that some of the supermarkets were not fully supplied anymore. And 30 to 40% of our drivers here in Europe are above the age of 55, meaning we have so many people who will go in retirement in that profession, and we have so few new joiners who are coming into that profession again, because predominantly it used to be truck drivers used to be educated in the army. When they came out of the army, that's the one thing they knew, to take over a job. And so I think both in the US as well as here in Europe, we will run in tremendous driver shortages over the next 10 years. And so we need autonomous trucks, and I hope that he's on a very good track to make this happen in the US, and that we'll hopefully follow up here in Europe quite soon, that we'll solve these capacity issues that we'll all see more and more over the next years.
Right. And but you're not, as we said, not removing the driver just yet because it's necessary for a lot of other, let's call them adjacent tasks.
Yeah,
right?
and so today where we are is we're still in the research and development phase. So we've been developing our technology over the last 6 to 7 years, and we've gotten it to be quite good, right? We're driving between Los Angeles and Phoenix, which is a 500-mile, 800-kilometer trip, and it can do that without the need for human intervention. But there are still edge cases that we're solving. So in the testing phase, we have what are called safety drivers that we put behind the wheel, and their sole task is to make sure that the truck is safe at all times while we're testing our technology on public roads.
All right. How does that change the? I mean, considering everything you just said in the context of regulations, rules of regulation for safety, drivers. Correct me if I'm wrong. In US, cannot drive longer than 10 hours.
That's correct.
Stretches. Yeah. So if with autonomy, they can extend these ranges and therefore drive the cost down?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest opportunities. Obviously, the first one is the cost of a driver is 60% of the cost for fleets, wow, which is a lot, right? And we're talking about a $700 billion industry. That means 60% of those wages are going right to that. Now, the second opportunity is actually the length of travel. So drivers are limited by driving 10 hours per day, which means that they can only go 800 to 1,000 kilometers.
And the rest of the time, they kind of hang out,
they have
whatever
to pull
they are.
over, they have to take breaks, they're staying in hotels.
Right.
With autonomy, you can imagine we can just go point to point, right? Thousands of kilometers at a time. In the US, we can cross the entire country in one trip. This means that now freight transportation becomes more competitive with the other modalities of freight, like air, because it's much quicker, but also much cheaper and more efficient at the end of the day.
Yeah, but not as popular in US as it is in Europe, I understand. Rail and air freight, right?
So less popular than air and rail freight?
Than road freight, trucking.
I mean, road freight here in Europe is quite big, especially because our rail network infrastructure is quite low developed. Also, it's a significantly bigger part of this in the US. That is correct, and that's also why trucking is really the backbone of, let's say, all our supply chains that we're having here. So whatever we do in Europe always relies on trucking in the end, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why we decided to start Sender. I think it's one of the reasons why he decided to go on his mission, because we feel we can do a small dent here to, let's say, really improve that industry a very bit. It will just become a massive bottleneck. Already is today, we're all feeling this, but will become significantly more in the next years.
Right. And in terms of technology challenges, both for autonomy and for, I guess, optimization of the routing, what are you looking at the biggest hurdles down the road? So,
I mean, maybe here, I comment on Europe, try to comment on Europe here a bit, but I think especially if we start with maybe autonomous driving, autonomous trucking, the number one hurdle we still have here in Europe is uncertainty on political decision. So there's a lot of discussion about, but it's still not sure who in the end carries the responsibility if something would happen to the truck. Is this the OEM? Is this the technology provider?
The insurances?
Or is it a trucking company, the fleet owner that owns the fleet? This is all not 100% clear. And this also means that all of the OEMs are the truck manufacturers that you all know, the Scanias, the Mercedes, the Daimlers, Volvo, thanks a lot, are not completely orchestrated. So I think that is challenge number one that we're having. Number two, what we just have in this industry is technology adaptation in general. Until COVID, until 3-4 years ago, in road freight forwarding, there was very little to no technology. And if technology existed, it was small software components that companies used to run or operate their own fleet in, but there was no to little data exchange. And this thankfully shifted a bit with COVID, with people having to work from home, people needing to be more digital, had to deal with more supply chain disruptions. So we've seen significantly more data sharing. We've seen significantly more data networks that eventually, in the end, would also enable autonomous trucks again on that front.
And governments are paying attention, I would imagine.
So for us here in Europe, it's really, let's say, uncertainty on regulation, autonomous driving. Number two, technology adoption in general.
How about you, on Brendan?
I think I'll start where Nico was, which is the trucking industry is decades behind every other industry when it comes to technology adoption. And so one of the things that we have to do as a business, in addition to just building the self-driving technology, is be able to take our technology and work it into the fleets, which are our customers, right? All of their IT systems, all of their maintenance protocols, et cetera, et cetera.
MS-DOS management systems.
Exactly, and even more archaic than that, a lot of it's done by paper.
Right.
And so how do we take this technology, which requires API integration and all of this stuff, and give it to a customer so that they can use in their day-to-day operations is no small feat, which is why we're starting to partner with some of the largest carriers in the United States, like Knight-Swift, to figure out how do we reinvent their operations so that they're ready to go when we're ready to go. So that's a big piece of what we do, which is a little bit less sexy than making the trucks drive themselves. In terms of technology challenges that are difficult when it comes to building the self-driving software, it all comes back to safety, right? I think we're at a point in robotics and AI where if you want your AI system to do an individual task, you can probably make it do it. The challenge in self-driving is how do you provably make that safe? And we have a new challenge that we're solving here in autonomous driving because we're bringing AI and robotics to a safety critical context, which means that we need to provably understand how our system will work in every single scenario.
No black box, right? Decisions
exactly.
For AI.
But we're going to have to use a mixture of statistical methods to prove that the system can perform well, which is why we drive so many miles on road. But we also use the more traditional bottoms-up analysis, the failure mode and effect analysis, analyzing hazards and understanding how hardware fails. So it's the marrying of what is a new technology with old practices that you see in aerospace, et cetera. And that's some of the cool things that we're doing at Embark.
Nice. And what about, again, on the regulatory environment in North America, I guess? Is friendlier to automation in many ways. We've noticed, but
I haven't spent so much time in Europe in the regulatory environment. My understanding is that it's a lot more measured and careful. What's interesting about the United States...
But now to clarify, you can drive a truck autonomously with a safety driver that can read a book.
In the United States, yes.
Right.
And
so it's a thing on the road now.
And on quite long distances, what you told me earlier
today,
today, which you don't have in Europe. You have test tracks, but it's always very controlled environments. Yeah.
Right.
The interesting thing about the United States market is that each state sort of competes against each other, especially regulatory. Some are really friendly, some are very cautious and careful, some want to be the innovators in how regulatory, the regulations get written. And so it gives the businesses the opportunity to align with the states that we want to work together with to bring the regulation forward. So there's still a ton of work to be done before self-driving trucks are going to be fully legal across all states in the United States, but we're certainly on the right path.
All right. And are there tests, pilot projects, or pilot programs happening in Europe? And what are the friendliest country for robots?
I couldn't answer the question what the friendliest country is, but I can definitely confirm there is a lot of pilots here in Europe. I think that is clear, and I think a lot of the technology we already have today across both the US and across Europe is that autonomous trucks can generally operate to quite a high standard freely on that. But it's more the regular environment, and that's also why our internal vision our internal vision is the wrong thing, but our internal prediction at Zender is that autonomous trucks will hit the roads in the US significantly earlier than here in Europe, just because of, let's say, more broader regulation to actually enable this and allow this. So I think the US will be probably at least 3 years ahead of us to have really adopt autonomous trucks on a broad scale.
And I think the economic use case in America is slightly better as well, right? Because of this driver shortage problem, or sorry, the driver hours of service issue that we just talked about. The cities in the United States are generally more spaced out, and so
The average trip distance
the
is probably
average,
longer.
yeah, and there's just a lot more opportunity for longer hauls within the U.S. And there's a lot more straight roads through the desert, which makes the problem a lot simpler for us, which is why we want to be there.
And how are drivers receiving your technology? Are they happy they can do something else while the truck drives itself?
Yeah, I think.
And sorry, just as a segue, how are the shipping companies using that advantage? They making them stay out on the road longer, or?
So today we're not extending any hours of service or anything. We're operating within the same constraints as the normal shipping companies do today. But the truck drivers are an interesting stakeholder.
For
in this
regulatory constraints, right?
Regulatory constraints, yes. So those are not relaxed because we're testing our self-driving technology.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the companies, how are they reacting? They're pushing for that to happen so they can make longer trips, can use the driver for more short trips, or I don't know, how is the...
Yeah, I think there's the economic case. They would obviously understand that would be beneficial to them. The thing that also challenges the shipping companies a lot is just reliability, right?
Yes.
Humans, unfortunately get sick from time to time. They don't show up to work. There's a lot of challenges there. So automation provides, in addition to just better economics, a more reliable, consistent service, which is important.
But maybe slightly different view on your first part of the question, the drivers. I think we internally actually feel, me and my co-founders, our management team, that autonomous trucks will bring something, will be very positive for the drivers. I think, yes, we have less and less, but also because if you think about the average European driver today, roams around all of Europe for, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks before coming back to his home country. And I think giving these drivers the opportunity to live more be home every night, because what we would foresee is that autonomous trucks here in Europe probably do the long distance, and then when it comes to the delivery in the cities that, as we heard already today, is in Europe are quite crowded and smaller, that trucks and as humans would do this. And so the driver would have the chance to basically do the last mile, or the first mile, what we say in logistics, do these deliveries, but be home every night. And it would improve quality of living, obviously, tremendously, rather than spending 2 or 3 weeks on gas stations around Europe.
That is quite the nice thing. And for once, a technology that doesn't make life more miserable for the users. All right. Thank you very much. It's been fascinating and insightful.
Thank you, Michele, for hosting us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.